Here is how to create a fantasy map. To start off, you'll want to start off with the basic design. This will include making the general landmass as well as islands, oceans, just your generic base plate of what you're going to add details onto. This is arguably one of the most important steps since it establishes the world as in general. Once you've done that, you'll want to start adding geography. This will be things like mountains, large lakes, any major rivers, things that just establish where in the world you are. This will also include biomes, which I recommend doing at least 3 of just to add some variety and give whoever is using it a reference for where they are in the world. Once you've established the geography, you should start adding details. This will be things like towns, cities, villages, anything like that. It could be monuments, but specific landmarks across the world that anyone who is using it might want to know more about. These would just be your general points of interest. You should have at least 4 to 5 types of landmarks. Think about it in the same way that you would see a regular map. It will just add more variety, and you're not going to only have cities. You're going to have farmland between, you're going to have parks, you're going to have rivers. So it just gives it more realism. You should also ensure that you follow typical geographical features. So you shouldn't have rivers flowing upwards unless that is specific to your fantasy world. But you should follow that rivers flow down. You should make sure that there's no towns or cities and places that just wouldn't make sense. And you should also make sure that the biomes interact with each other in a way that makes sense. This could be things like putting jungles on one side of a mountain and deserts on the other. That's a very common thing in real life, so it would make sense to organize it in the same way in your fantasy world. Any questions?
Are there other things I should be thinking of besides monuments that my village might need?
Anything that you think would be fun for players to interact with. You could do things like ruins from a past civilization to add more world building traits. You could do farmland. You could do a base for the military to train. You could do an outpost. You could do a fire watchtower that they could go in and explore. Just things that would be fun for them to interact with while also building the world more.
So I could have restaurants for them to eat at and then interact with each other?
Yes. There is one podcast I would very much recommend called D&D. They are a food-based and D&D based podcast. So things like that can be very fun, where if you're playing with other people, you could make a menu and make the food coincide with the area that they are in to just make it more, I don't want to say more interactive, but just to give them a better idea of what this place they are in is like.
How big should I make my map?
Kind of a generic answer, but however big you want. You could also, if you don't want to make one huge map, you could make specific regional maps. So it would be you could make one big map how you might see the US, but then you could also make smaller maps for each state. And then that way your players can have a more intimate knowledge of each region on its own instead of just as a part of a whole.
So when I make my map, can I expand? Once I make it, it's
you
set.
can always expand it. And I mean, you look at it, even in real life, there are things like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes that are constantly changing the map, even at a small scale. But so you could always use world building to just say, oh, this thing happened that changed it, if you have to change a large section of the map.
And everyone here for the presentation is over the age of 13.